for inviting me for this very interesting conference. And at the outset, you mentioned we need to have we need to clearly map the nexus between clinical practice, education, and research. And I think this is a very important agenda in the field of Ayurveda, mainly because the research community in Ayurveda is slowly evolving and it's not yet well formed. And at the same time, the education is lacking in many respects. So let me begin with my own biography and then go into some of, I have 4 suggestions to make it, or 4 thoughts to share with you. So let me, after Ayurveda, I moved on to medical sociology and medical anthropology, then looked at international development for my doctoral program. And this gave me really an overview of the global perspective in which Ayurveda could be promoted. Now I work with a program called A Decade on Education for Sustainable Development, which is a UNESCO program, and which is and this is between UNESCO and United Nations University. And this is about education. And I must admit, I am not an educationist, but I see that there are several changes happening in the field of primary, secondary, and higher education world over. This is why Japanese government especially promoted this decade on education. And what happens is that during the Rio Summit in 1992 and subsequently in 2000 in Johannesburg, many people felt that education is becoming very mechanical and it's not very socially relevant education. And they formulated a roadmap to transform education. So the world is really talking about transformative education, which has concepts like value systems. So today we had a discussion of bioethics here. So value system, participatory learning processes, critical reflection, social learning theory introduction, transdisciplinarity. These are some of the concepts, and subjective learning, and so on. And these are some of the concepts which Ayurveda is really strong. But the education sector within Ayurveda in India is going in the opposite direction. It is becoming value-free. It's becoming institutionalized. It is becoming. So the point that I want to make, my first point is that Ayurveda should adhere to its own these fundamental principles of holistic thinking, system-based thinking, and so on. So when we talk about a global introduction of Ayurveda, I think this is very important to be aligned with some of these global thinking processes. So, and we have very limited opportunities to engage with in the global policy process. As Mr. Ambassador was mentioning, WHO is one area. Then we have the Convention on Biological Diversity, or the indigenous UNFPI, or that is the Indigenous Rights Convention, and the Biodiversity Convention. Then there are different forums in which traditional knowledge and traditional knowledge education is discussed. So there are very limited avenues in which Ayurveda as a system can engage with. And WHO is very formal. It's a member state driven process, whereas a Convention on Biological Diversity is much more people oriented, much more civil society oriented, though it is member. So I think as Ayurvedic community, we should be aware of some of these global processes and critically engage into these processes. That's my first point. Second point is much micro level. Some of us sitting here were fortunate to be in part of Krishna Kumarji's model of an in-situ education. Ayurveda should, he had a very high vision that Ayurveda should be taught in its own right. So you should be taught darshanas, you should be taught Sanskrit. And so I think it's very, in this globalization process, it's important to keep up this tradition of in-situ education, because Ayurveda cannot be revitalized by outside research and linking it only with modern science or other knowledge system. It can only be strengthened with its own inherent strengths, and the education has to be solid on that ground. And I also take the other position, ex-situ education, where there are medical anthropologists, there are Indologists, there are new natural scientists who are coming into the field and looking at Ayurveda critically. And I call this bridging research or next situ research process. And I think we need to create learning systems where some of these ex situ practices, or outside system practices need to be strengthened. So we need to have an in-situ approach, we need to have an ex-situ approach in education sector and Ayurveda. This is my second point. The third point is about the academic community, especially when we talk about international, global education in the field of Ayurveda. I see that international academics are not really oriented to Ayurveda as a system. There are elements which are being absorbed into maybe European context or American context or Northern context, but not as a system. And I think this is a critical gap where Western academics or even Indian academics are involved in a very, very limited way. So we need to have a system where more and more academics and more and more bridging researchers they come into the stage. And so we need to create some learning processes for these bridging and research community. And finally, my final point is about outside academic wisdom. Because if you see, some of us after our Ayurvedic education, we went into the field and we met with the local paramparas, the field knowledgeable people. And I think there's a lot of strength outside academic communities still. And we have been doing some experiments in Bangalore where we are trying to integrate some of these outside practitioners into the academic wisdom. And I think this is also a very important thing to look at. So let's not limit Ayurveda into institutions and institutionalized pedagogy processes. Let's take it out also. These are the 4 points. Thank you once again, Dr. Ram, for inviting me.
Thank you very much for bringing so many valuable points in such a short time. So I think we'll move on to Dr. P.M.S. Ravindra.
Respected dignitaries and dear friends, considering the time constraint, I have made a few points to discuss, or some of my opinions as a practitioner for the last 25 years, and also as an informal teacher of Ayurvedic students from India as well as from outside. I have certain things to discuss with you. It is Indian national Ayurvedic institutions and national government departments like Ayush should try to get the truthful information regarding the works and potential of Ayurvedic professionals and institutions which are really contributing towards the theoretical and practical aspects of Ayurveda. These institutions should then provide this information to the students and the patients who are coming to India from outside, and to the foreign institutions which are existing in the teaching and healing practices of Ayurveda. This is not happening, and the Ayurvedic students who come to India from outside and the patients who are coming for healing are many a time being cheated and are groping in darkness. Ayurveda colleges in India must become centers of excellence in clinical Ayurveda as well, and giving more importance to clinical aspects, being a clinician. Because then only we can connect this Shastra and Tattva to the Prayoga aspect of it. We have to try very hard to change Ayurveda into the first choice of treatment when somebody gets sick in India. We must use very strong medicines in good dosage so that the disease gets cured fast. By this, we can win the confidence of the layman in India. We must show and prove to the modern world that Ayurveda can cure any disease once it is treated in the right stage. All these issues are pertinent when we consider Ayurvedic education internationally. As far as Ayurveda is concerned, it's quite natural that Western world tries to follow Indian footsteps in Ayurvedic education and practice. That's why I am concentrating more on Ayurvedic education and practice in India. We should make use of the traditional Western medical knowledge regarding plants in the West, which is not being explored seriously, maybe due to the feeling that it's unscientific. This humoral concept of properties and actions of Western plants could be understood and elaborated based on Ayurvedic principles. This involves real tapas, kind of meditative learning. Unless we do this, we are really not contributing to the dravya or raw material aspect among the four principles of healing. India cannot supply the medicinal plants to the whole world, and the Ayurveda does not advocate this either. We should always use locally available resources for treating the patients, but the problem is in acquiring the knowledge needed for that. We should not aim, and a very important point is we should not aim only the rich people in the rest of the world to use Ayurveda. We should try to make it accessible to the middle class people in any country, for which we should present small, cost-effective clinics run by one doctor and one attendant for performing minimum 5 Panchakarma treatments a day. They can also perform other educative programs and consultations along with this. Exerting more pressure over the administration in the world in order to accept Ayurveda as a scientific system of healing. We have to win the confidence of and belonging of common middle class people in any country, not only in India, in any country this is important. Unless we get popular support, we will have to do this hide and seek game always. So these are all certain points which I feel very important when we think about the international education. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to request Dr. Ramesh.
I have a basic feeling that there's a lot of dichotomy when we think about Ayurveda and Western medicine, or modern sciences for that matter. But I am of the opinion that today we are talking about Ayurveda from a much reduced, a very political definition of Ayurveda. It's almost become, I would think that is the greatest debacle that has happened. When we think about Ayurveda as just those plants or medicines or treatments described in the 56 textbooks, or practically that has come to define Ayurveda. But Ayurveda is much more in the sense that it accepts anything that is good for the patient as appropriate. And in that sense, there is nothing that is un-Ayurvedic. You cannot have a medicine that is not Ayurvedic. So, and there is no system, and we never said that the process of diagnosis or anything is restricted to only this. We always have the system of accepting whatever is the truth. And so, I don't think there is a paradigm conflict between any science that is representing the truth and Ayurveda. And Ayurveda, up to a certain extent in the past, has always been accommodating new things. In practical effect, even today we are accommodating a number of Western science-driven initiatives into our day-to-day practice as well as into our application of Ayurveda. But still at a foreign level we are not open enough to accept that we have really integrated number of plants and number of products that are supposedly part of the Ayurveda as we define it today have not been native to India. They have come up much later. Number of diagnostic techniques, we don't even have this Dashavida Pariksha in our classical Brihatri. Even those diagnostic techniques came in later. And Ayurveda has always been of the opinion that the ultimate vision is one that comprises of a holistic vision and a microscopic vision. You need to have the knowledge of Vishesha as well as the knowledge of Samanya. And I think today we have sort of stood at the level of Samanya and we are very happy with that vision. We definitely, that is the strength that we have today. Because most others in the process of specialization and super specialization have lost the total vision. We seem to retain the total vision, but unfortunately we are extremely happy with that Samanya Vishesha. Samanya approach that we fail to recognize the specifics. We know that this disease is of Vata origin. We know this is of Kapha or Pitta, and then we are happy. But we are sure, we also know that all medicines that treat Vata are not going to treat that particular disease. That means there is more specificity. It's even our Shastra has always mentioned that in this situation, the more number of variables that you are able to consider, you get into more number of sub-classifications. And the more those classifications, you become more and more specific. So it never recommended that you either stick to a microscopic approach or to a microscopic approach. We have recommended that your ability to see a particular thing from both those perspectives is a real strength. And in that sense, I see absolutely no contradiction with integrating modern knowledge systems, which is being trying to know more and more specifics. A molecular understanding is in no way contradictory to what Ayurveda talks about, but it is contradictory if you think that only a molecular approach is enough. You must know the molecule, you must also know the total person. And if you are able to effectively integrate these two approaches, that's when Ayurveda is being practiced or being talked about at its totality. And that is the paradigm approach that I would suggest, and that is whether we like it or not, that's already happening. The entire world is already very clear that it needs both. We can never assume that what we call as Ayurveda today only should exist. You know, today what we are talking about Ayurveda is a very reduced form of Ayurveda. Whereas Western medicine or in a modern medicine, it is just a part of progression that has been going on where the search has been more into specifics. And at one point, everybody in that sphere has begun to realize that more and more specific alone is not helping. You need the specific, but you also need the total approach. And so it's a stepping back. That's where we are being sought after. So it's, even in our education policy, I think this is the big question that we are talking about. Whether we need modern knowledge or whether we need Ayurveda, I would say it is not, either of it alone is not going to be useful. It has got to be both. How, which is to be first, which has to be next, still it's a question for me. Because I went through the process of knowing the totality first and then I'm trying to know more and more specifics. I'm happy for it, but then I think there is a lot of specific that I still don't know and I'm not. Whether you need to learn Western medicine first and then learn Ayurveda, I think it's not a bad idea. Because you need a more mature mind. But whether you are totally by then sort of sold into this microscopic concept which makes it difficult for you to conceive the totality, I'm still confused. I mean, I've had to go do the both way to be really realizing what it takes. So I was even wishing that, but I think a day in the future is going to come where the specific knowledge is going to be mandatory. At least in any other part of the world, it is going to be mandatory to have Western medical education as a fundamental tool to get into practice. So if you're talking about globalizing Ayurveda, you've got to assume that a person has got that level of knowledge in terms of Western medicine before he embarks on a study of Ayurveda. And so, I wouldn't think it's going to take long before it's going to be the pattern in India as well. Because we all, even when we are sick, we are not happy, you know, we go to a doctor and he just sees our pulse and he gives us a medicine, he gives us something, we are fine if it's cured. 5 days down the line, you are still not okay, you get upset. You think, oh, I should have had a blood test. Maybe I'm having malaria. It's there in our heart. So we definitely cannot rule out the specificity. We definitely need Western. I mean, that's an advancement in science, and there is no need to say that it is not Ayurveda. Very much a part of Ayurveda. And it's just a problem of how much can you know. That's a problem which even modern medicine is facing. That's why there is super specialization. I'm sure there was a few years back, the biggest doctor was the general practitioner because he had to know everything. Today people are finding it easier to become specialists because you need to know everything, because it's impossible to know everything about everything. That's why the super specialization is happening. But the ideal doctor or the best doctor is one who is an expert in general medicine. He has to know everything, and that's why before you become a super specialist, you have to know the whole spectrum. So I think this is there is a challenge. I think very clear, concrete plans have to be drawn about how the education is to go about. I think it's a process of evolution also. I don't assume that it will happen overnight. I think everything that's happening is in the right direction. First, we are looking at quantities. We didn't have enough number of doctors to sit in hospitals, so now we are looking at so many colleges, so many universities teaching Ayurveda, but we say the quality is missing, it is got to be missing. First you are looking at quantity. We try to have food sufficiency, now we are talking about how can you make it organic, how can you make it better. But if you are hungry, you can't talk about organic food. That was the state we were in earlier, where the numbers were totally inadequate. So now we are generating numbers, and I think it's a matter of time before when we will start talking about quality. And just like I would have one practical suggestion, which I think could be implemented. I don't know how the policy framework works. I have not been involved in government policy making so far. But I think one small step would make a huge difference if we believe that we are in a stage where quantity is not a problem and quality is a problem. In that case, we should insist on a common examination platform, just like what they do in certain other. I would take the example of a CA. If you have to become a chartered accountant, you are sure by the time you pass, you are definitely knowledgeable in accounts. There is no way you can become a CA without having a fundamental knowledge. Similarly, if you set a benchmark for Ayurveda, that if you have to become an Ayurvedic doctor, you must know certain fundamentals, and that will have to be step by step. Even CA never had everything in one stroke. They are keeping on adding to the syllabus. Similarly, we may have to start slow, but then implement that this is the basic minimum, and have a long-term plan. Say, that's our golden standard by which we hope to reach by, say, X number of years. But today we start here knowing that this is not enough, and then keep going step by step. I think it's a matter of time before we can reach a level where Ayurveda, any graduate who is passed through this system would have a basic standard. For excellence, that's another thing altogether. Primary education is where you ensure the basics, and then beyond that, sky is the limit. How you can get into excellence, I think it's a very, very different process, which is very individualized. Not everybody can become an expert, and it's always a pyramid like this. The experts are only a few at the top, and what you are looking at is the bottom of the pyramid, where the basic standard of the 80% of the people who are coming out is above a particular level. I think that focus at the educational level would give, this is what I would like to suggest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Like what we wanted out of this panel was, do we have enough issues now to initiate something? It's not that we are going to come to any conclusion. Like we had an overview from different perspectives, like Professor Martin Midwede and Mark Rosenberg put, very important points. When even as Ayurvedic practitioners, we must know what is the global audience that we are going to address, what kind of teaching methods. Even it will be important for an Ayurvedic student to know that if you are going to teach Ayurveda to a global community, these are the challenges. And I think Dr. A.N. Nambi also endorsed these views on the basis of his own experience and added various points. And Ambassador Singh, I'm very happy that he took his whole time to, hopefully that was sufficiently enough. We didn't want to interrupt you. But since I found that you have a written document, it's an exercise. One of the points that we wanted to have different people is that we document these deliberations. Everything is being videotaped. We're going to use this to initiate post-conference discussions. There's no point. Conferences are to initiate new things. It's not to end something which you're already doing. So we are going to definitely work in that direction. The point that Ambassador Singh made of having a recommendation, we have done this several times. I'm really not sure whether writing up recommendations and submitting it to government bodies will be of any use. We definitely do that. But I think that we should have some action plan. And one of this is, I don't believe anymore that we can change curriculum, we can change the way CCM does things, we can change Ayush. It seems to be impossible, at least in our lifetime.
Don't give up so soon.
No, not definitely in the way we are trying to do it now. But can we do things? I personally believe that all these issues that we brought out, the points that Uni mentioned, I have also a strong opinion here, is that I believe that we must create learning environments. That is where the points that, and this should be an add-on to the existing system. And this should become so powerful that the existing system chokes, under the influence of what we are creating. Like today, you need a license. Now, unless you go through a CCR recognized course, you cannot claim to be an Ayurvedic physician. But the problem is that this licensing doesn't really equip you with the knowledge that is required to deliver Ayurveda. So what we need is a system, a learning environment which will try to fill the gaps created by the existing system. And this should become so powerful that it kind of trickles back into the system and creates a change. Because nobody can stop us from creating these learning environments, because we are all qualified, and this could be the way, to actually initiate a change in the way Ayurveda is taught and propagated. So today afternoon we are going to have a special session where we are going to carry forward. Unfortunately, we cannot have everybody there, so we had put a sign up opportunity, and we're going to start with a core group. But every one of you will receive an invitation with a summary of all the discussions that took place, and you're all welcome to participate in this movement, because I think only if we start doing things at the grassroots level, we can expect some real change. Because the other thing we have been trying, I have also been a member of the Central Council of Indian Medicine. I'm really very pessimistic. Ambassador Singh wanted to say a few words with which we will conclude.
I'm happy to retire, so I don't represent the government. But I think let's not be so cynical, let's not be so skeptical. Let's go back to 1994, before I do nothing. Let's see where we've come from 1994 to 2013. Both in terms of institutionalization, numbers, Dr. Ramesh rightly said, we're talking about quantity. Let's not forget the larger picture. We have a demographic dividend, we have 60% of our population below 30 years of age. You have to give them all. And once you extend the numbers so drastically, there will be a question of quality. But I think there's no contradiction. At one level, we must continue to do that. The government has to play a role. No private body can be a regulatory mechanism. You have to have an institutional support. You have to be, you're talking about 1 billion people. But I think what Dr. Ramesh said, the excellence can come with the kind of issues, initiatives you're talking about. We have to have a base. We have to build on that base. Let's create that base. Let's make Ayurveda acceptable within our own country. That itself is a problem. Our biggest threat is not from our friends outside. It's from our allopathic doctors within our own country. We have problems to address. But let's not get cynical and have this broad system that nothing works in the government, there's no point talking to them, we've sent them many initiatives. I think there's an egoism involved, that just because we've sent them a whole set of recommendations, they should be implemented. They have other concerns. So I think let's look at it from our point of view. You have specific suggestions, let's make them. And it's like little drops of water at the same spot. They make a dent even in a stone. But let me assure you that the government is a lot better than this.
So I think we will sign off with these positive words. I must say, I will also take that message and be more optimistic. We'll try to do what you advise, and let's hope that we will start, making the dent in even those stones.